Welcome to this Carbon Trust event, Accelerate to Net Zero Europe, and have we got a show for you featuring some of the best speakers from across Europe, including the European Commission, RISE, BASF, Ørsted and Carlsberg, to name but a few. Today we're going to hear about challenges and successes as we all face up to the impacts of the climate crisis. But we'd also like to hear from you. You should see a poll on your screen right now, and you'll see these throughout the show. Please tell us, where are you watching from today? As the event goes on, you can ask questions, answer polls, and find out access and information all on the right hand side in this box. There's also subtitles in English or in many other languages if you'd like translation. Our mission at the Carbon Trust is to accelerate the move to a decarbonised future. With over 400 experts around the world, we help businesses, governments and financial institutions to accelerate their route to net zero. We've played a central role in establishing the standards and measures for carbon emission reductions that are used by thousands of organisations today. We've also supported the development of new technologies and programs that are leading the way in the global response to the climate crisis. We all know that the clock is ticking. If you joined us last year, you might remember that the event was called Route to Net Zero. This year we're calling it Accelerate to Net Zero. This event is part of a global series, so if you're interested in our work in Africa or Asia or anywhere else around the world, make sure you check out the events section of our website at carbontrust.com, where you'll find information on those other events. Now, let's take a look at the poll. So thank you to those of you joining from France, from Germany, Austria, Italy, Basel in Switzerland, of course, the UK. I think there's a big contingent from the Carbon Trust as well in the UK. Australia, that's quite a long way. So let's get on with the show. First of all, if we just take the poll off the screen, I'd like to introduce the Carbon Trust CEO, Tom DeLay.
Hello. I'm Tom DeLay and I'm Chief Executive of the Carbon Trust. I'm really delighted to welcome you to today's event, Accelerate to Net Zero Europe. Europe is extraordinary. It's the vibrant heart of much of the leading thinking on climate change and net zero, and we're delighted to be here working with our partners and clients and hearing from them today through this event and its format. Coming back to the Carbon Trust, we're an organisation with one mission: to accelerate the transition to a decarbonised future. Accelerate is the verb. It's what we're here for. It's to do more than is just required, to really push ahead and accelerate that transition, however hard we know it might be. We deliver impact through the success and ambition of our clients and partners worldwide. We work with our clients and partners either directly, helping them with issues specific to their organisation, or more broadly, by driving and supporting collaborations that can go across from public to private sector, or indeed across whole industry sectors, looking to make progress and share in that progress so that individually organisations can then go ahead and build their future routes to net zero. Being practical is what we're all about, and that's what today's event is all about. Making Route to Net Zero something that is tangible and real for your organisation and helping you think about it in that way. We're going to have a number of panels, we're going to have a number of talks, but we're also going to have an opportunity for you to contribute directly, to interact with what is going on today, not simply be passive. And please, I would ask you to do that. It will be a better event if you do. So that's all from me right now. Thank you very much indeed for your time. I look forward to the rest of the event. It should be a great success. Let's hope you can help make it so. Thank you.
Now we're going to look at accelerating towards net zero with properly designed and governed digitalisation. Our keynote speaker is Ilias Lakavidis. Ilias is an advisor at DG Connect, which is part of the European Commission, where his work focuses on the interplay of digital and green transitions, in particular looking at the greening of the ICT sector, digitalisation in support of green transition, and digital for circular economy. If you have a question for Ilias, please use the box on the right hand side and I'll put some of them to him towards the end of this session. Ilias, welcome. The floor is yours.
Very much thanks for inviting me. Very much would like to resonate what Tom just said. It's about being practical. So if I lose you any time during the presentation, please let's come back to it in the question, or I leave my email in a post-event follow-up. So what my message today is are you as companies, are you as organizations using the full potential of digitalization, of digital tools? Because digitalization is the tool that we actually trying to get the maximal benefit from in the Commission and with the stakeholders like Carbon Trust, and I will explain that later. I think it's still underused, but also there are traps that we want to avoid because the rebound effects and the effects that you can have using digital, the unforeseen effects may not always be positive. So yes, digitalization is a powerful tool, but it needs a proper governance and knowing how to use it. So this is kind of the biggest message already spilled over before I even start my presentation. So as a Commission, you are bombarded, I'm sure, by many legislations from my colleagues from all over the corners, from DG Klima, DG Environment, DG Just. So you get corporate social responsibility rules, consumer type of directions. You have the environmental reporting that you need to do, and DG Klima is really pushing on acceleration of the emission reductions. So I'm sure you're surrounded by all the things we do. And Green Deal is kind of the mother of all the legislations that are coming up lately. But I'm sitting in the digital agenda corner of the Commission that has for decades had nothing to do with the green. So we were in a separate planet. So for a long time, digital agenda and the green agenda were kind of a separate, non-communicative agendas. Well, that has changed with this Commission. I myself tried to actually change that. And we have now those two transitions in a way that we're trying to twin them. Now, the question is, what does it really mean? So let's look at few examples where digitalization is already proven on a smaller scale that is beneficial. Before I go to Digital Product Passport, which I will actually end, this for me is one of the most powerful tools that we're building, we have already, and there are many publications by Jesse and by Carbon Trust. We have already a lot of evidence what digitalization can do, not only for your scope 1, scope 2, your buildings, your transport, your kind of operations, but in the society at large, in the economy at large. But the biggest problem for you, I'm sure, is scope 3, and we will come back to that. And that's where I think we are not utilizing enough the digital power of your supply chains, the data management gathering, and later on changing your business models. So I'll come back to that as well. Now, the most kind of climate critical sectors where we already do a lot of pilots and even legislations is energy sector. And energy sector is kind of the first one where we see the power of digitizing electricity grids. Just digitizing electricity grids and smart, let's say, IoT solutions, you can avoid leakages. Leakages in electricity are about 2% of total electricity that you can save, which is huge. It's even more than the electricity consumption of all those digitalizations you need to put in place. But electricity is not the only distribution network that is leaking. And I'm sure Geraldine later on will tell us about the water distribution where the leakages are huge. And smart monitoring can actually give us a better insight where it's happening and how to prevent it. The second kind of a big one is transport. And a lot has been done there. And connected mobility is kind of hailed as one way to do things. And agriculture. But I will stay in agriculture to give you one example how things can go well and how things can go bad doing digitalization. So you get the picture what's happening and what kind of trap you can get into. Today, it's the precision farming is very popular, and I don't know if there are actually companies in the audience working on precision farming. So we have a precision farming solutions that are kind of connected meteorological stations, a lot of sensors in the soil, on the plant, drones. If it's big fields, also satellite connectivity. All that is put together to work on better prediction, better herbicides usage, pesticides usage, fertilizer usage, water management. All that is put in motion. Now the question is, how do we deploy at large scale? One way that we see member states and others doing is they push gadgets on farmers. Pushing gadgets on farmers will go only so far because they have no capacity, they have no resources, no skills, and basically it will underutilize the power of digital. So that we are afraid, and we are actually making those calculations with the Carbon Trust, is that if you just push gadgets on farming, the direct footprint of all these gadgets, drones and IoTs and connectivity and laptops and AIs on the laptops, all that has a footprint. Are we going to be sure that we're going to recover the negative part and the enablements will actually overcome that so we have a net positive effect? We don't know. We need to measure and we need to guide the farmers how to do that. Maybe a better way is to take companies that are in agricultural products, like those that are selling herbicides, pesticides, fertilizers, and say, can you become a service company? Can you change your model instead of your model being a quantity-based business model where more quantity I sell, more money I make, to be a service model to kind of help farmers to keep the health of their plants, where you get a fixed amount per hectare, and then it's the company's responsibility to put all that smartness around to minimize the use of agricultural products. So you see, there are ways where digital can actually change the business model and make it healthier for the plant, for the soil, for the people, and to be profitable as well. So this is just an example where digital can be powerful. We do of very grandiose projects like Destination Earth and many others. I will come back to Digital Product Passport. The only one thing I want to say still is that many of you as companies are aware that we have kind of worked with member states on the next generation of EU, the so-called resilience and recovery plans, and 700 billion euro has been kind of given to European countries to spend on digitalizing. 20% had to be spent on digitalizing, and about 40% had to be spent on greening and the green transition. Unfortunately, what I see is that the capacity of the member states, the different ministries, is not yet on the level of understanding how to use digital for greening. So there's not much green in the digital part of this 700 billion, and there's not much digital part in the digitalization in the green part. So that is kind of indicative that there is not a good understanding, and this is kind of public office writing it, but of course they are also in touch with the stakeholders like you. So this message is basically also going to you. Digitalization is not yet used properly for green and for the net zero transition. Of course, and this is, I will not say long, we know that there is a footprint. We know that green is not, digitalization is not green. So we're working as DigiConnect, as Commission, on data centers to be greener, on telecoms to be greener, on minimizing the waste, on making sure that the next generation of processors that we actually building are more energy efficient, green software. All the greening of ICT is happening, but it's not the subject of today. So when we say green digital transition, the twin transition is a priority, what does it really mean? What you see in the media and what many of you maybe as sustainability officers are aware of is that, there is a lot of conflict. I mean, all these electricity consumption of electricity, of the digital, the footprint that is close to 3, maybe 4% in Europe, and the waste that is the fastest growing waste category is a problem, and that dominates in media. What I want to actually push as a message to you now, that there is a huge and much bigger potential for synergy of the transition for your organization, but also for your business and for the society at large. And if you compare the 3% footprint of digital with a 15 to 20% of enablement, you see there is a huge potential, but it's a potential. It has not been realized yet. Why has not been realized? Okay, maybe there are not enough infrastructures yet in place, but because people don't know how to use it properly. And that is what we basically working on in the, in the coalition that I will mention and with Carbon Trust. How do we know what proper use of digitalization is? How do we measure the net effect? How do I measure the enablement? How do I subtract the direct footprint and come up with the net impact of digitalization in a given scenarios? Precision farming, smart mobility, smart building, energy distribution, energy integration of micro producers, peer-to-peer energy exchanges. How do I use that in a way that I stay net positive? And for that, we have, as a commission, initiated with 36 major ICT companies, the so-called European Green Digital Coalition. It is a venture that started in 2021, but actually has really started working last year. And we, as a commission, have put money to support this coalition of committed ICT players with a project that is led by GESI. It has Digital Europe in it. It has ETNO, the telecoms, and GSMA. But the heart and soul of it is Carbon Trust, helping us to analyze case by case, real life data. How do we actually perform using digital solution in reality? So we take real life data from precision farming, real life data of a smart building, and make the calculations. What is the embedded? What is the negative impact of digital? What is the positive impact of digital? What is the net impact? And while we're doing it, we actually harnessing some kind of knowledge of what kind of guidelines to give energy sector, transport sector, smart cities, agriculture, manufacturing, what kind of guidelines to give them to maximize the potential, to maximize the benefits and the net impact of it. So many thanks to Tom, to your team, special thanks to Veronica, of course, and her team, and Anna, for helping us doing that. This is one of the most important things we're doing. And we are now in the phase where we would like to welcome the vertical sectors to show them how digitalization can be done to avoid traps of rebound effects, to use the minimal number of devices, so you minimize also the direct footprint, and maximize the benefit. So this is kind of a call for interest of the vertical sectors. As I said, the major kind of focus we have is on energy sector, transport sector, construction, agriculture, smart cities, and manufacturing. Those are kind of the major sectors we're working on. But of course, there's the retail sector that is very interested, and we're talking to them. And I just had a meetings with Decathlon and IKEA and Zalando and those and others. Okay. Now, one message to, you all know that your biggest problem is the Scope 3 emissions. And for Scope 3 emissions, maybe just the carbon glass and carbon kind of focus on emissions may not be enough, because sustainability, even if, say, tomorrow everybody's on renewables, just focusing on gas and oil and electrifying everything may not be enough. We need to look at natural resources as a whole. And I'm sure that there are other speakers, like I said, Geraldine, but also Simon and others in the second panel will talk about what does it mean to be on a material efficiency level. What does it mean to reduce use of natural resources? And we're talking water, we're talking wood, metals, land, sand, you name it. It's not only about oil and this. So the Holy Grail that we're looking at as in the Commission under the umbrella of circular economy is to decouple our economy, because today GDP means more resource use. how do we decouple what we call sustainable prosperity from the use of natural resource? Well, circular economy is the one. But if you look at the details of circular economy, it's all about information sharing. It's all about knowing what the supply chain is doing, knowing where the material comes from, knowing what is the footprint of my little, subcomponents of my product, and knowing what the users will do it, knowing how to repair, to refurbish, to reuse, and knowing what the recycler will do with it to give me back the material so I can start feeding more of a recycled material in my products. So it's all about loops and information, capturing, gathering, processing, sharing. So it's all about ICT, and that's where we come as a commission, and we have put up, as you know, in March last year, the Eco-Design for Sustainable Product Regulation, and the new kid on the block within that is the so-called Digital Product Passport. This is what we're really after. And the Digital Product Passport and the digital twin transition is not only something that has to be looked at by Ministry of Competitiveness Industry. It's everybody's job to really get it right. Ministry of Environment is very interested in climate, telecoms, industry. So coming back to green and digital, at the moment, the problem is that it falls between two chairs. When I go to ministries and they say green digital transition, they say, oh, that's for environment. When I go to environment people, they say, no, it's for the telecom people. We don't understand that. So at the moment, and maybe Mia can enlighten us because she was in the Prime Minister office before, this is a Prime Minister issue. To really get the green digital right, it cannot be left in the mercy of one of the departments because they always kind of don't understand the other and the capacity is not there. It has to be pushed higher up. So Digital Product Passport is the kind of information system that will give us information across the supply chains and across the usage of the product that we ultimately want to change the business models from quantity-driven business models to more material and natural resource efficient business models, which is basically, think about it simply as everything as a service. Move to dematerialization and move to virtualizations. There are many things the digital has managed to virtualize. Talking about music, for example, just think of how many things we don't use anymore. Material products is all kind of virtual. So there are many ways we can still have a profitable business and be using less natural resource, because at the end of the day, the ultimate goal of the Eco-Design for Sustainable Product Regulation is to have sustainable products in Europe that are cheaper. That is the ultimate goal. Of course, there are many obstacles because today sustainability means extra cost. I need this data. I need to make sure that supply chain gives me that data. How do I manage that? So it's a lot of confusion, but the ultimate goal, and hopefully the right legislation in place, will get us there. So in concluding, we need digital for getting acceleration on the net zero pathway, but just emissions is maybe not enough. We need really to look at the overall picture of sustainability, and digitalization is the way to go if you really want to go from quantity-driven business model to service, product as a service. So thank you very much. You can take out the slides. I don't know if I can do that myself. And I'm ready for questions. I'm afraid I'm already...
Thank you very much, Ilias. Thank you. And yeah, really interesting, the priorities in the three areas that you discussed. I know that we've had some questions, so if we can put the questions on the screen, please. I'm going to ask the top one because it's been upvoted. So the audience would like to know, what are some of the key things non-ICT companies can do to understand how digital can help them have a net positive effect on society?
Right. There are, well, basically the first I would say is come and see if you can benefit from participating as a supporting partner, or even just to have a look what the Green Digital Coalition is doing, because we are developing the answer to this question. We would like to publish guidance per sector. Are you agriculture sector? Are you construction energy manufacturing sector, we are developing guidelines how to use ICT. In summary, if I had to just say 3 bullets would be, when you think of digital, don't think to buying equipment. The same thing I just said about service, think of digitalizations to be a service to you. So go to your Gaia X representative or go to the clouds companies that you're using and ask for a service. Because when you ask for gadgets, it's already a wrong start. First, ask for the minimum number of whatever infrastructures you need, ask mostly as a service, and then try to see what exactly, well, we're trying to do it, what are exactly the points where you get the biggest bucks for your effort in terms of reducing emissions or reducing materials, and avoid rebound effects, because rebound effects, how could I say, applying digital without any governance and any thinking will most probably do more damage than good. I mean, don't quote me on that. I'm just shooting myself in the foot. But if you just say digitalize without any governance, without any proper use, with the frugality, with a very specific skills and goals, will get you in trouble more than in good thing. And that is where we as a coalition try to develop these guidelines. So I think in summary, come and our heart and soul is Carbon Trust. Contact Carbon Trust, contact me, see what the coalition is doing for you on this.
Just finally, we're almost out of time, but I'm fascinated by your experience. Where have you seen the greatest impact? I mean, you talked about leakages in the distribution network for electricity, but also water. Can you give us one example where you've seen a huge impact from digitalization?
Right. I think energy sector is one. Just leakages. I mean, there are companies that are members that like Schneider Electric or Atos and others, which can give you numbers on buildings. The proven cases are energy efficiency of buildings. I mean, just doing the simplest thing with digital, you have 10 to 20% energy efficiency of a building without nothing using materials, just smartness. I mean, buildings is 40% of our carbon emissions in the world, in Europe especially. So smartness of a building is immediate, it's done, it's easy, it's proven by our coalition, methodology. Another one, as I said, is integration of micro producers in electricity, managing the, let's say, the capacity, the flexibility and the demand supply of electricity grids. And especially because many of us are micro producers, peer-to-peer exchanges. Another one is manufacturing. That's already happening. So in manufacturing, people are using IT all the time, and it's efficiency goals. It's a lot of kind of, if you think about digital is a tool to support sustainability, but traditionally it supports one dimension of the sustainability, the economic efficiency gains. It struggles with social and environmental gains. Okay, so now we're pushing a lot for environmental, but at the end of the day, remember, you need to ensure that it's also fair and socially acceptable what we're about to do with digitalization. So manufacturing is more the traditional, and there is smart cities is maybe the most talked about. Smart cities solutions, which is kind of integration of a traffic, of energy efficiency of buildings, of the waste streams. And if you go down all the way down to food waste and distribution of secondary use of clothes and food and things like that.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for a fascinating presentation. I'm interested to see how this develops, of course, I think like everybody else in the audience. But Ilias, that's all we have time for right now. So thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to hearing more in the future.
Thank you.
welcome everyone today to our first panel. We have Simon joining from Carlsberg and Geraldine joining from Grundfos. But first, I'll just quickly define net zero, because I think it's always useful to start there. So a company that has achieved net zero is a company who has reduced its emissions in line with 1.5 degrees by between 2040 and 2050, and essentially neutralized the remaining emissions. And this is across its entire value chain. So one cannot essentially achieve net zero before 2040, 2050. However, there are, of course, interim targets, short-term targets that companies have typically set to 2030. So today we're going to be discussing that entire journey and what it kind of takes to set those targets and implementation plans. But before we start, we've got a little poll just to see where everyone is on that journey. So as you might be aware, our panelists have set net zero targets and are going to be sharing their experience there. But we really want to hear from the audience as well, where you are at, so we can get a feel of who's in the room and hopefully get some engaging questions as well as we go through the panel. And just a reminder there that, of course, you can put those in the chat and we'll hope to leave some time at the end to get to those. If we don't get to them, we will respond over email. So I hope the poll has worked. I can't see it myself, but maybe if we're not getting any results yet. So maybe as that's coming through, I'll quickly hand over to Simon and Geraldine to introduce themselves, and then we can see the results. Yeah, maybe Simon, you start, and then Geraldine, and then hopefully the results will come through.
Sure. Thank you, Pauline. So my name is Simon Boas Hofmeier. I'm the head of Group Sustainability and ESG at the Carlsberg Group. The Carlsberg Group is a fairly large brewing company. We have many different brands across the world. One of them you can see behind me. It's a Vietnamese brand called Huda, but we also have more known brands for us here in Western Europe, including Tuborg and Carlsberg and other brands. And I look forward to the panel discussion.
Yeah, my name is Geraldine. I'm the climate director in Grundfos. And Grundfos is a pump company in a simple term, but we do also a lot of water solutions. We are based also in Denmark, operating internationally around the world. We have 34 plants around the world and 56 operating in 56 countries and covering around the world. And we have committed to SBTi since 2019. And then last year we have got both our near-term and also our net zero target approved. So look forward to share more with you.
We have two leading companies here today who have set those net zero targets and are really on the route to net zero. So I think it would be really great to hear from you both first how you kind of came to the decision internally to set those targets in the first place. I think a lot of members in the audience are probably still in that phase. And of course, net zero is incredibly ambitious. It's very long term and quite hard to conceptualize because it goes far beyond, the regular business planning cycle. So maybe Geraldine, if you can kick us off with how you kind of developed that internal business case, why Grundfos really felt it should take the lead on this topic.
Yeah, happy to do that. And of course, what we have done, we are looking at food from both the angle of the lens of responsibility, but also on the opportunity. And last but not least, of course, also a little bit on the risk assessment. So responsibility, it is, of course, as you also have the beginning, have said that, the science is very clear that we have to, as a world, we have to heading into net zero. So we cannot really just stop at the near-term target in 2030. So, sorry, as a company, this is really purpose-driven and as Grundfos. And we have even in our vision saying that we will pioneer our solution to solve the world's climate and water challenge and improve the quality of people's life. So that actually gives me a very strong which is normally really important in a business case, that you have a strategic fit. So that's where our purpose and part of our responsibility. And opportunity, it is actually something that we also explore in the process when we are setting up our near-term target. So in 2019, so going back a little bit history, memory lane now, and when we committed to the near-term target, I think we actually only looking into 2030, what we can do. But the process of doing that open up to see what kind of business opportunity and innovations, and it's also for room for transformation is available there. I think first we see a lot of opportunity, but at the same time we also can see that many of the transformation and innovation that we can deploy, we would not actually able to come to the full scale by 2030. It has to go beyond. And that's to ensure that we have a continuity and also leading the organization to see this is a long-term change, and don't get too worried and hung up with if I can see a near-term result. And the net zero target actually from a business point of view help us to see this is the business case and this is the horizon that you're looking into. And that of course you shouldn't wait until 2050, but this is where you're heading. And so this, both the responsibility and opportunity part was really helping us to frame it. And I also think the business resilience part is also a very important role for us to play an important role in our strategy on how do we actually see why net zero is very important for us, because we wanted to stay ahead, and this transformation will help us to stay ahead, and a little bit more on actually the actual benefits on it as well. And then first short statement also on the risk assessment is you can always discuss why should we do that, and then the cost of not doing it is also extremely high as well, especially for us as a company that we're a pump company, but if you try to categorize us, we are actually a technology-based problem-solving business. So a technology-based problem-solving business, if you're not keeping up, you would actually be eliminated. So for us, the cost of not keeping up, the cost of not acting on it to be resilient is also high and has a implication so the strength of our future business as well. So that's how our business case look like.
Great, thank you so much. And really interesting to hear that B2B perspective and kind of remaining relevant, having that competitive advantage. And I'm sure, Simon, you share many of those elements, but obviously you're a B2C business, so slightly different stakeholders. It would be really interesting to hear from the Carlsberg perspective how you made the business case for net zero.
Well, sure, Pauline. And I think my first comment will be that there isn't a business case for net zero. If anyone has that, I think they will set up a consultancy and be very, very rich. I think for me, it's more about making a decision as a business, a decision as people who are working in that business. And for us at Carlsberg, of course, we were one of the first companies in the world to have a 1.5 degree aligned scenario or target in 2017. And back then, the discussion on the longer term vision, let's say, was a little bit less developed than it is today. And back then, basically, the decision we made was that we, as a brewer who is relying on a healthy ecosystem and on the natural resources that the planet is so good to give us, well, if that ecosystem is failing, we will not be able to sell beer. We will not have a viable business model. And given that, we have been around for 175 years, we would like to stay here for another 175 years. And with the trajectory that the world is on, well, then nobody is going to care about drinking beer in 100 years if we don't change this. And if I am to be a little bit more specific, I think any responsible business, they will look at risk and they will look at opportunity. And when we look at the risks, then of course there is potential disruptions to supply chain. There is changing consumption patterns of our products in a climate constrained world. There is regulation, there is cost drivers that is basically impossible for anyone to perfectly foresee. But here, an internal carbon price is a really good tool to start at least thinking in the long-term viability of your investments in a carbon constrained world. When I look at the opportunity side of a so-called business case, I think it's really about starting with the coalition of the willing. If you have specific customers like we do, if you have specific consumer groups that are more concerned, more interested, more engaged in the climate discussion, then start with them and then develop from there. Because having some successes, having some good cases, some wins is incredibly important, both for your internal work on fighting climate change, but also in terms of the outside world. Show that you're actually doing something. It's not just back office talk and Excel sheets. It's something that actually hits the shelves, that is consumer facing. That is very, very important when you're a brand driven business like ours. So again, it's not rocket science. There isn't one business case, but any company should ask themselves, who do we want to be? That's the purpose part. They should look at the risks to their full value chain, to their business, and they should really look at what potential business opportunities are out there. Where can we really harvest some benefits of taking a real serious and strong stance on fighting climate change?
Great, thank you. And I think that leads really well into kind of the next area of, once you have set a target, what do you then actually do to kind of be in line to achieve it? And just to set the scene, I think, we've all seen certainly an increase in the past 12 months, a big focus on greenwashing, green hushing, and essentially the allegations that, well, many companies have net zero targets, but do they actually know what that means? Are they actually transforming their business in line with a net zero trajectory? So maybe back to you, Simon. You already started talking about this, but could you tell us a bit about how, once you set the targets, you kind of went about as a business to think, what do we need to do to actually get there? And maybe, a bit on some of the challenges, but also the wins that you kind of alluded to.
Mm-hmm. So when we started the journey in 2017, we did not have a net zero target. I actually don't think really the net zero methodology was even developed in 2017, if we really remember back. And where we started was to say we want to make our breweries carbon neutral by 2030, and then we want to reduce our value chain footprint with 30%. So back then, I can honestly say that we as a business, we were not ready to make a net zero commitment by 2040 in 2017. But during the course of our work on Scope 3 emissions, on identifying hotspots, and on really finding out how we can have a viable business in a climate constrained world, well, then the need for taking that next step, which was a net zero target in 2040, it was very, very clear to us. And the reason for that was that we started together with the Carbon Trust, by the way, in 2017, to harvest low-hanging fruits. And again, I think it's about what any responsible business should do. And what does that mean? Well, it means that we started with a very rudimentary efficiency plan. So how can we save energy in our own breweries in order to, you could say, finance the climate transition? So that is where we started. We then moved on to identifying the hotspots in our full value chain and understanding and knowing where we had the biggest emissions. And to us, it wasn't a gigantic surprise, but for example, packaging makes up more than 40% of our total value chain carbon footprint. To other businesses, it's more like 5 or 8. But because brewing and beer is generally a fairly low carbon product, so the liquid itself, then our packaging really made up a big part. So knowing that, having the information was absolutely key in order for us to then make decisions. So, when you look at what is, my advice to companies who want to start, well, start with low-hanging fruit, start with the parts that might actually save you some money, because that will then make it much, much easier to argue and discuss the financing of other activities that might require some more financing. And then secondly, start with data, start with information, start with really getting the facts in place. Because if you start off with without facts or with bad data, then all of the decisions you make from there will actually not be right. So at least that was our starting point in 2017.
Great, thank you. And Geraldine, your Scope 3 footprint looks slightly different and indeed very challenging as well, because 99% of Grundfos's emissions come from the use phase. So maybe you could share a bit how you've kind of conceptualized tackling that and getting started there.
Yeah, I can. And then I can swear that Simon just speak half of my notes. So I'm just, without knowing anything, he has peeked into my notes, even the wording was the same. But I definitely can speak into that. Yes, we look for a difference, of course, because we are selling pumps and our pumps using electricity. And of course, so that makes our biggest emission is actually in our Scope 3 downstream emissions. However, I would say the actions that you need to do are not so much different from where you have to tackle the other area. You still, I very much agree with what Simon have just said, is you have to look into the data and you actually have to spend a lot of time on your data. And do not watch, even though you would look to some low-hanging fruit very quickly, you really wanted to act on it, but there's nothing stop you from acting on it. But the big decisions and actually to really develop the whole work on deployment on the decarbonization strategy, you need to spend a lot more time than you think on data and actually go as far as you can and go as detailed as you can, and to actually identify where is, first of all, your hotspots, really where is your highest intensity on your emissions. And there you also would notice there's low-hanging fruit. But after you have done the really full analysis, you will figure out that maybe some of the low-hanging fruit, you can do something about it, but they ate your biggest problematic area, you can say. So you can actually design, and it also helps you to develop some short-term plan, and you can, using the low-hanging fruit to meet your near-term target perhaps, but you will still need to, at the same time, starting on some parallel work that is a more long-term, have a longer payback time, and has embracing a little bit more risk as well. So for us in our solution, and actually in an industry like water, and things takes time to change as well. That it actually means that we cannot just taking the low-hanging fruit in order to meet the long-term target. We actually have to start some of the really long-term changes already now in order to see the effect by 2030 or 2040. So this is something that we do. Also, because we have to deal with our customer, we are B2B business, and our emission is actually happening in that Scope 1 and 2, and that helps also to bring them on board. If they are on board also on SBTi, they also have their own target. They are motivated to reduce their Scope 1 and 2, and that's also where we actually can reduce our Scope 3 downstream. So it is not so much difference from other business working on Scope 3 upstream. We just have to do the same with our customers while maintaining the business. And one of the key things that we do, and actually is really one of the strongest tools that we do, is that we actually make our own Scope 1, 2, 3 emissions as our group level KPI. And of course, at the same time, we still define our business that we still need to grow. So basically, as a group, we have decided that we are going to continue to grow our business, but decoupling our emission growth from their point. And that it is a very bold move. And do we actually have all the answer to that? I can tell you, no, we don't have all the answer, but this is a decision. This is how we want to inspire the organization and make sure they understand that this is how we want to run our business in the future, is we want to grow our business that is decoupling with an emission growth. And this is the direction that we need to take. And this is, I would say, one of the strongest statements that we can actually bring to the organization to make sure all our colleagues is on board, and also to communicate to our external stakeholder that we mean this as a business. We don't mean it as just, a CSR or just greenwashing, because this is something we set as a company KPI. This is how we define our success now, if we can reduce our emissions.
Fantastic. That's really great to hear. And you touched on a point that actually overlaps with one of the questions that someone who registered sent in before the event. And that was, you've both spoken about the low-hanging fruits and that these can, quite well get you to that 2030 near-term target. But when we look at everything post 2030, as you mentioned, Geraldine, there are some unknowns, which I think most of our clients have experienced, as well as everyone else who has a net zero target. And really the kind of level of decarbonization that's needed there. So, 90% across all value chain emissions by 2040, 2050. This is going to need some quite radical change and maybe even new business models. Could maybe, Simon, if we start with you to kind of, how has Carlsberg started to think about that longer term, more radical and really deep decarbonization?
So, in fact, you're touching upon some of the keywords from our most recent update to our sustainability program. Together Towards Zero was the name from 2017 until 2022. But in fact, in 2022, here in August, we added 2 more words called and beyond. So basically now it's called Together Towards Zero and beyond. And the and beyond part was actually primarily driven by the need for hashing out some of the hotspots in more detailed targets. And just to give you a concrete example, then, when we did the hotspot analysis in our full value chain, and we had 25% of our footprint from farming and from the agricultural sector, we had around 13% from brewing, we had 40% from packaging, we had around 13% from logistics, 9% from cooling. When we broke that down into each of the value chain steps, using real primary data for around 60% of all of the information and the emissions and the spend that we actually had in that, well, then we could see that it was no longer enough to have a general climate target to say, oh, we're going to go net zero, and then we're just going to fix it in the background. So 2 of the new targets and areas that we've singled out was in fact the agricultural area and the packaging area. So now if you go to carlsberggroup.com/ESG, well, basically here you will see that we have 2 brand new zeros to achieve zero farming footprint and zero packaging waste. And if I'm just focusing on one of these and how these are really transforming the long-term carbon impact of that area, well, you look at agriculture, it is an incredibly underdeveloped area within decarbonization. It is also an area that is very, very difficult to grasp. It is also an area where you need a lot of partnerships and cooperation to make change happen. So here we have set ourselves a target of moving to 30% of our agricultural products to come from regenerative practices by 2030, and 100% of our purchasing by 2040. And of course, the point here is that a true net zero target, which means for us that we will abate 90% and potentially offset, maximum of 10. Well, then it is definitely not enough to just assume that we will find carbon negative or carbon neutral solutions in the agricultural supply chain without us stepping up, without us engaging with our suppliers and with the industry, with farmers, to develop low carbon growing solutions like no-low tilling, planting cover crops, having green fields basically year-round, cross-cropping, doing all of those things that we know have an effect, but that we now need to quantify. How much of an effect? What do we have to change? Does it change the way we purchase our grains in the future and our barley? What will the challenges be for the farmer on the ground who wants to convert to regenerative practices? So, that's an area where you have to start early. You have to accept that you don't know everything from the beginning. So basically we're saying we have a methodology on regenerative farming, but now we're going to develop it with our partners, with the supply chain, with the universities, with anyone who can help us. That is the only way to really achieve deep decarbonization within the agricultural area. And that's one example. And now I will stop talking, Pauline, to allow Geraldine to also say something.
Thank you. You touched on a really interesting point, which links to one of the audience questions that has actually just come through, which is on the importance of kind of external partnerships. You spoke about, engaging with your supply chain, even with universities and other technical partners. Geraldine, maybe you could share your experience there as well, or the vision that Grundfos has to kind of really work with a network of partners to achieve and work towards net zero.
Yeah, I think no doubt that actually, I think that's I would say this is actually one of the most exciting things about committing to net zero and having net zero target, to be honest, is all the innovations and also all the partnership that opens up to you, because now you're looking at things that is at a much longer horizon, which you don't actually bounce by the typical challenge that when you have a new innovations if you have tried to work with startup and entrepreneur, time is actually where most of the time what kills a business. How much time do I have a prototype, and then what do I see I have is my payback time, and all this. Basically, this is what the startup is struggling. So if you actually have a net zero target where you actually looking into something that is long term and is something that you accept is not going to see effect in the coming couple of years, and it opens up a lot of innovations, and actually you can nurture a lot more innovation as well. And I also think, even though you would think that we have a net zero target and latest by 2050, that sounds like a lot of time. But if you're actually looking into most of the entrepreneur new innovation, it takes 7 years from the idea into scale and mature the ideas in a real business environment. And so it is actually not a lot of times, and especially with the scale that we want to deploy, it is now that we have to start. And so I think it adds urgency if you're able to tell this information to people, but it's also extremely exciting because it is not boring. It is not just saying that, okay, now you have to take your responsibility. Now you have to, you have to take your vegetables and you have to drive your EV. Actually, now we're talking about let's do some transformation, which we actually have tried to do transformation for quite long and in many different industries. I don't think it's just in our business, and I think in many places, digitalization, transformations, everyone wanted to do that. And this is actually the best trigger, I think, the best anchor point for you to do that. So I think this is exciting. And I think with the speed that we're talking about as well, it also opens up how much you embrace a partnership. And because you were not able to have all the answer on all the solutions, and you need to get inspired as well. So partnership is going to be one super important thing if you want to reach net zero, and if you actually wanted to reach a real net zero that actually would able to stay, and that you are not creating your own fantasy that what will work, and you need to open up. So partnership, I think, in net zero is one of the most important things. And also a little bit touch up what Simon has touched upon, I think is important, is coming to net zero, especially from our lens in Grundfos, it is also talking about more collective actions. So it's not just the focus on the energy consumptions and how much emissions we can reduce, because as a company, I think we have the dilemma is we wanted to reduce emissions, we want to be more energy efficient. But at the same time, the world is actually walking into a water crisis. We are running out of water. We have to do more with water recycling. And so the like of desalination, they actually use a lot more energy than the current process that we just extract groundwater from a well, and that doesn't take a lot of energy. And so we are actually having two problems at the same time. So we want to reduce our energy consumption, but we are moving into a world that is using a more energy intensive water process. And I don't think this dilemma is alone to us. I'm pretty sure different industry has the similar dilemma, and is coming up is we are moving into a green transition that actually doesn't allow us to be green. And that requires a lot more collective actions that look beyond on just climate and emissions, but actually embeds into, other justice transitions. I think if you have been in the COP27, you hear all the collective action, including biodiversity, all related. So I think the collective actions that actually, in order to reach net zero, what is the sphere of influence that you have on your actions should also be part of your net zero goal and action as well. And therefore, I think the partnership is not just on technology partnership, but it's actually a collective partnership on other aspects of sustainability development as well.
That's really interesting. And I think, yeah, you bring up a really great point that it's not just about reducing your own emissions, but actually thinking ahead and speculating what does the economy look like in 2030, 2040, 2050. I think even a company that doesn't act and doesn't set a net zero target will be operating in a world that is aligning to net zero. So what are the changes that we experience from, the climate change that we know is going to happen? What risks does that bring to my business? But also, what are the kind of, transition risks of the economy moving in that direction that I might not be able to anticipate or leverage if you don't set that net zero target, but also importantly think about the challenges of the future and how you're going to meet them. I think that's a really interesting area to explore. And I guess a bit more on the uncertainties and risks. A question has come into from the audience. Much of this is a bit unknown, particularly when we look at 2030, and we have models to kind of predict those risks and kind of we have a view of what technologies might enable net zero, but how do you kind of convince internally and externally your stakeholders that you are genuine about net zero, even if you don't, know all of the answers yet? How do you kind of make colleagues internally feel comfortable with your pledges, given there are unknowns, and then, communicating externally that even though you have unknowns, you're still on track to net zero? Maybe starting with Simon.
Well, so for us, it's really about showing the actions and showing the performance that you have done. When we look at our value chain footprinting, then basically we reduced our scope 3 emissions with 7% between 15 and 19 per produced hectoliter. So, we're showing that we are able to produce our beer in the full value chain, in the full 1, 2, and 3, with lower intensity. So my first point to anyone who challenges us on that would be, well, you can't go from 100% emissions to zero within a couple of years, right, in the full value chain. So the fact that we're on the right track, that our data shows it, that we have a very solid measurement, that we know our value chain, that we know our hotspots, and we have specific targets driving towards it, would, for me, be the proof that we're not just running around talking about fancy targets and then, not delivering on it. I do think that the discussion on what you said, green washing and green hushing and SDG washing and all of this, it's an incredibly important conversation to have, as long as it is a conversation. I know, for example, the science-based targets, they were under some criticism a year ago or so, and I think that's a good conversation that helps the science-based target improve. But in that conversation, I do not know of a concrete way to create specific targets for many different industries. I do not know of a better methodology than the science-based targets. And by the way, with any methodology or any difficult area, you have to accept that you keep learning, you keep developing it. And that would be my same answer to any people who like to ask, what about? I call that whataboutism. Because when you look at a gigantic area like net zero decarbonization of a global company, then there will always be something you don't know. There will always be uncertainty. There will always be methodology that can be improved, or areas where you have not gone in the right direction, where you went in the opposite direction. But if you do not start, you will never get there. If you don't challenge status quo, you will not change the carbon intensive processes you have today. And really being fact-based, showing progress, being concrete, that is my way to counter any criticism or whataboutism, but at the same time maintaining a humble approach and saying we don't know everything by far, and we need help. We need criticism also in order to improve. So I think that mix of pragmatism and concrete action and openness to learn, you can't live without it in the world of net zero.
Absolutely. Thank you. How about you, Geraldine? How have you tackled this internally and externally?
Yeah, I think I can only say I fully agree what Simon has said. And first of all, if I tell you now that we have a plan to deliver our net zero and we know that we are on track, then it obviously would be a lie. Because I mean, a year ago we would not have known how the energy crisis unfold, and I do not know all the answer. And it is also, I also think that I also try to tell our colleagues, to be honest, to not worry so much that we don't have all the plan up until 2050, because if you have planned everything, you didn't leave room for transition to diverting risk, and you didn't leave room for innovations because you planned everything. And that means in your plan you have not planned to embrace any of that, and that, I would say, that is unrealistic to believe that you have a plan. It's unrealistic to actually expect any company to answer you that I am on track to my net zero. I would say net zero is a goal, net zero is the guiding star, and I think I fully agree with what Simon said. Yes, what is more important is I can show you what is my plan in the coming years and what is my plan in actions, what I have planned to do and where am I investing in. And that is where I can prove to you I am moving toward to net zero. Whether or not I will get to net zero, I didn't plan to fail, but I cannot promise not to. But this is not in the plan that I will fail, right? But what I can only show to you is what I'm actually doing. So I also think that in a world as what we are, especially in sustainability, in climate, in ESG area, and if you do not plan to adapt and learn and explore more, and you would actually get into trouble. So if you want to lock into one methodology, one guidance, one setup, and one framework, and that you don't want to change in the next 5 to 10 years, you will run into a big problem, because this is probably one of the most dynamic area that changing requirements, and you have new regulation, you have new requirements, new methodology. A mistake is being found on a daily basis, and that if you don't embrace those and change and accept that what you have developed last year, that might be a fault that you couldn't foresee and you didn't see, and you have to change next year. You set up yourself to failure, and that's not a real failure. It's just what you perceive to be a problem. It is an area that evolving so much. So I think the most important things to do is to, when it comes to greenwashing, there's only one counter actions to that is a transparent communication. Is being data driven is fact. There's no magic around this. If the concern is greenwashing, this is the only answer: transparency and credible data and fact-based communication. That's the only way.
Thank you. So we're approaching the end of the panel. So I'm going to ask both of you to think about your kind of key top tip for someone who's starting out on this journey to set net zero targets and the implementation plans, and maybe something you wish you had known or your company had known before you started. While you think of that, I believe the poll results are ready, so we can have a quick look at where our audience is at on their journey to net zero. Okay, so that's really encouraging to see that actually the majority of the attendees are calculating baselines and targets. and many are also implementing. That's also fantastic to see. And we have a large commitment group as well. But there's still, a sizable portion that haven't started and still discussing internally. So I hope our panelists have shown you that this is very much something that you can move towards, that it's aspirational, that it's really going to improve your business and then help it be resilient, competitive, and importantly, as was discussed as well, continue to grow in a net zero world. So with that, I will hand it over to Simon and then Geraldine to give us their kind of closing remarks.
I'm not going to give you one tip, Pauline. I'm going to give you three. Number one is our learning since, really having engaged in this since 2015-16 and launching our science-based targets in 17 is to get started, lean in, start collecting the data, do the measurements. It's okay that you're not perfect from the beginning, but you have to get started. And when you do that, make sure it's a cross-functional project internally. And by the way, I highly recommend getting some external experts to help you. That helps both on the outside-in perspective. It also helps on sometimes getting some muscle into the project team, some man hours, and some really skilled knowledge to help you get started on the first point. So really, number one is lean in there and start measuring and understanding your full value chain footprint. And number two is for me, it's very important to focus on primary data. I know that there's a lot of companies out there that is looking at economic input-output models and secondary data. I personally don't think that's the right way to go. I know that primary data is much more difficult. It's much more tedious, but the benefit you get is that you can actually see your real purchased goods in your value chain footprint. We have 36 different companies that operate as different entities. And the only way that we can keep real engagement internally is that our company in Vietnam can see their specific footprint from their specific suppliers. If you only use secondary data, this is not possible. And the third recommendation is to be humble and engage your supply chain on an explorative basis. Your suppliers, they know their products quite well. And I spoke about the coalition of the willing earlier. We had some suppliers like within aluminium, ball, or OI within glass, who were really ready to engage in this conversation and who are also themselves now having really, really ambitious carbon targets. So engage the value chain, be humble, learn from their experience and find solutions together on how to truly decarbonize your entire value chain. So those would be the three pieces of advice from my side.
Great, thank you. And Geraldine, if you have three, you can do that as well.
Yes, I hope that next time when we go to buy beer, we also buy one, get free, Simon. But I think I have two. First of all, I think for a company, if you are really just started, I think it really helps. I think for us in Grundfos, it helps that you start to treat carbon emissions or GHG emission actually as a currency in your data collections process. I think, first of all, the process of integrating it together with the finance team and have the data collection process similar to the finance system and start to collecting all this information, just like our finance data. It has been a big help. It is one of the most transformational steps that we have, and it improves the quality and it also help our colleagues to understand on why do we need this level of accuracy. It is not just some assumption data is good enough, but because they are used to the finance system, they know when it comes to finance data, it has to be accurate, it has to be fact-based. And it actually helps to translate a lot of this, explaining a lot of the requirements that we need also in the ESG data. By doing so. So I think this is actually one of the good steps if you have not already started doing this and work closer with your finance team and actually streamline the process on your data collection. I think that has been one of the really, really important that we have done in Grundfos. And second is, I think it's actually a little bit what Simon has said in the previous questions. I think embracing some of the paradox and the what if. Because sometimes if you are too worried about what you don't know, and therefore you don't do anything, then you guarantee it will not happen. And it is kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy in this case. If you don't act, then of course it won't happen. And I think this also depends on what company you are in. I think company like Grundfos and Carlsberg, where we are in our industry, we have a leader positions. And if we don't act, of course, we were not able to drive the industry to do that as well. And that is very important, that you act, or else the changes that you want to see will not happen. And of course, I would say, as I explained our business as well, that there is a paradox, there is a challenge, it is a dilemma. The factors are actually disagreeing with each other. How could I sell more, pump more water, and using less energy, have less emissions? It doesn't make sense. And I would say a mini episode of this kind of a paradox in situations where we almost wanted to tell ourselves this is not happening. It also happens. I would not tell you it not happens and everything was a rose and garden and just go very smooth. It is not true. It is all this happens. Everyone has doubt in this, and everyone will doubt at any given moment. I think what you have to keep in mind is we must embrace there are something we don't know, and embrace those what if and those paradox that happens to you, and actually make sure that you set out your goal of what kind of change that you want to do and focus on the change that you wanted to achieve, or else that changes will not happen. I think embracing that with uncertainty is very, very important if you want to move toward net zero.
Great, thank you, and really thank you both for your candid responses on this panel. I think the more companies and individuals open up about their journey and make it realistic is ultimately what's going to help us all work together and work towards that common goal. So thank you very much, and thank you for the audience for your really interesting questions. I hope you really enjoyed the discussion, and yeah, on to the next panel. Thanks everyone.
Hello to everyone. I'm delighted to be moderating our second panel session for today, which is focused on discussing new opportunities from the net zero transition. So while our first panel highlighted what we mean by net zero and also focused a little bit on sort of what is required for companies to get there, including setting targets, developing an implementation plan, and financing the transition, we now want to shift the focus a little bit to talking about how companies can actually play a role in developing and also promoting the solutions and technologies that are needed for a net zero transition. We also earlier today heard from our keynote speaker, Ilias Yakovadis, on the importance of digital technologies and how the ICT sector, for example, can provide many solutions that can address some of the challenges that companies are facing to decarbonize their operations. But as Ilias highlighted, this topic does not only impact the digital sector, because collaboration from all sectors will be required to ensure that the right solutions are being both developed, but also effectively deployed to ensure that all of society can transition to net zero. Yet for most companies, the focus so far has mainly been on reducing their own emissions impact. And while this remains an absolutely crucial focus, more and more companies are also seeing the role that they can play in providing the solutions and products to help other sectors and society more widely decarbonize as well. So before we start the panel, we wanted to also find out a little bit more about whether you in the audience have started to think about this in your own organizations. So we have another poll that you will be able to respond to, which hopefully will pop up for everyone. And this asks the question, which of the opportunities emerging from a net zero future is your company capturing or planning to capture? So have you started considering business model innovations to transform your operations? Do you see an opportunity for your business to access new markets or serve new customers by sort of providing low carbon products, for example? Is your business embracing circularity, or maybe you're looking to reduce capital costs and enhance your reputations? So we'll let you respond to that poll, and then, as you can see now, we'll also see the results pop up. But in the meantime, I would now like to begin our second panel and start by introducing our panelists. So to begin with, we have two experts joining us from companies from two different sectors. First, Cordula Mock-Knoblauch, Head of Sustainability Accelerator Aroma Ingredients at BASF, and Mia Pren-Nygaard, Senior Sustainability Advisor and Program Lead for Supply Chain Decarbonization at Ørsted. So welcome to both of you. Both of your companies have, in their own ways, identified opportunities for the transition to net zero. But before we dive into that, I would like to first ask you to briefly introduce yourself, your organization, and maybe also talk a little bit about how your organization is reducing its own impact across its value chain. As we know, this is, as I said, a crucial first step before taking a more solution-focused approach. So maybe we can start with Cordula and then Mia.
Yeah, thanks, Veronica, for the kind introduction. And as Veronica mentioned, I'm with BASF, a large chemical company headquartered in Ludwigshafen in Germany. We have more than 110,000 people working for us at 6 large Verbund sites, more than 200 other production sites, and we're able in 2022 to have a turnover of about 78 billion from our operations. But I think for our session today, what is more important than these figures is the purpose that we have. Since many years, we are saying we create chemistry for a sustainable future. And of course, this includes greenhouse gas emission reduction. And when we look to the past, in 1990, BASF has actually been responsible for Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions of 40 million tons. We were able to reduce that over the last 30 years to roughly 20 million. So it's about the half, while at the same time, we were about doubling our production output. But of course, this is nothing to just say, hey, there we are, that's great. But we have to approach a net zero future. So this is also what we set ourselves as a goal for 2050. But of course, there have to be steps in between. So our target for 2030 is to again reduce the absolute emissions by 25%. There's a clear roadmap behind. Activities have been identified by which this can be reached. And you can basically group them into two categories. One part is to really transform the energy that we are using, how this is produced. Traditionally, we used to burn gas. Now we are really moving to using renewable power, and also to make sure that the steam that we are using, some excess steam that is produced, can then be reused again using renewable power. So it's the topic of heat pumps. And I mean, you might have seen that also in the press releases. There have been some investments have been made into offshore wind parks by BASF together with other partners. So we are really on the implementation track for switching to renewable power. And then the second part is really about looking into our chemical production processes. What can we do there to significantly reduce greenhouse gas emissions? And the probably most prominent project here is the cracker. The so-called steam cracker is the starting point of chemical industry value chains. It's very energy intensive because high energies are required, high temperatures to do this cracking process. And also here we are together with the partners SABIC and Linde. We are now investing into a first pilot to use renewable energy, renewable power, instead of burning gas for heating this steam cracker. So these are some measures that we are now really implementing that will help us to reach that 2030 goal, everything around Scope 1 and Scope 2. Of course, Scope 3 is also really important, but I think this is something we can talk about a bit later during our session today.
Thank you, Cordula. And Mia.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Mia, and thanks for having me today, Veronica, discussing this very exciting topic. I work here at Ørsted, which is a renewable energy company, a global company. We are leading within offshore wind, onshore, and also developing and expanding our pipeline for hydrogen production, producing alternative fuels, for example, for the shipping industry. This wasn't always the case. We used to be called the Danish Natural Oil and Gas Company, and was actually one of the most heavy fossil-based company in all of Europe. We are headquartered here in Gentofte in Copenhagen, Denmark, and we used to account for 1/3 of the total carbon footprint of Denmark's national carbon accounting. Back in the early 2010s, we took a very bold decision to transform our company from one being very fossil-based to a renewable energy company, which also means that we are well on track now to reach our carbon neutral target in 2025 of having now reduced our carbon footprint from our own energy generation with 87%, exceeding our own expectations also in this journey. Our decarbonization journey doesn't end here. Last year, we got our net zero target covering both scope 1, 2, and 3, science-based target approved last year, which means that in 2040, we aim to have a total net zero footprint across all scopes. This latter one is also some of the efforts that I'm coordinating internally and externally in Ørsted.
Fantastic. Thank you. Well, I think both of you have really nicely highlighted how your companies are both sort of ensuring that their own value chain footprints are being decarbonized. So I would now like to also bring in Jay Hennessy, Future Sustainability Expert and Director for Mission Innovations Net Zero Compatibility Initiative at RISE. Jay, would you also be able to quickly introduce yourself, your organization, and maybe talk a little bit about now the importance of companies moving away from just focusing on a sort of risk reduction to also having an opportunity and solution focused perspective?
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Veronica, for the invitation to be here. And hello, everyone. My name is Jay Hennessy. I'm Director of Mission Innovations Net Zero Compatibility Initiative and Senior Project Leader at RISE. Firstly, thanks again to the Carbon Trust for being a core partner in the first phase of the Net Zero Compatibility Initiative and co-developing the avoided emissions guidance that we launched together at Mission Innovations' fourth ministerial in Canada. Our aim in that first phase of the framework was not only to provide a reference for best and next practice for assessing avoided emissions, but also to shift the thinking beyond a climate risk or reduction approach, as you said, Veronica, where we tend to focus only on what is most bad in our existing systems and attempt to make it less bad. And in fact, we see that some solutions or innovators that self-identify as climate solutions come from this problem perspective and might identify themselves as enabling emissions reductions, but sometimes don't contribute to avoided emissions in society. But as new opportunities emerge from the fourth industrial revolution that we're in now, our focus is on identifying and accelerating solutions that are compatible with 1.5 degree sustainable living and the opportunities that come with this move from a climate risk innovation perspective to a climate opportunity innovation perspective. So at Mission Innovations' fifth ministerial meeting, we presented 1,000 solutions from around the world, assessed with a solution perspective from large companies, incubators, and startups, with the solutions combined representing over 12 gigatons of potential avoided emissions. And for that, we worked with ministries, national energy agencies, cities, incubators, some of which were not at all aware of their climate solution potential because they were focusing on finding methods and technologies to reduce existing emissions, often through technology substitution. So they were really inspired by an approach that focuses on their potential to provide and hopefully export solutions that can contribute to global sustainability. And it was in the second phase of the Net Zero Compatibility Initiative that we developed what could be called an expanded climate innovation agenda for assessing 1.5 degree sustainable solutions. In that phase, we focused on how to identify solutions that address human needs in a way that is compatible with 11 billion flourishing lives, as the UN predicted we would have in the year 2100. For many companies, both large and small, it's a significant challenge to establish a direct link to delivering on human needs. For example, they can be far down the value chain, like producing, say, nuts and bolts that could be used for anything from electric vehicles to oil rigs. And even if they know that they are used for electric vehicles, they might not know if the electric vehicles are intended for use in multi-million-dollar collections by the super rich, or in electric ambulances for hospitals, for example. And for innovators, this perspective is often really empowering and inspiring, as most don't get up in the morning thinking, how can I reduce my emissions today? Their driving force is meeting challenges in society, and a human needs assessment of 1.5 degree sustainable solutions can also support disruptive and transformative solutions that otherwise might be missed or dismissed simply because they don't fit well in existing systems, or there isn't enough good quality data supporting an estimation of their impact. And just to end with a little anecdote, a surprising aspect of this approach, which perhaps isn't so surprising, is that some senior sustainability experts that we've talked to say they found a new sense of hope and excitement that we can tackle our climate problems after being introduced and thinking from this solution perspective with a human needs approach. So we think it's important and almost appears radical, but in a strange way, because it shouldn't be.
Great, thank you, Jay. I think you've really nicely highlighted and made it clear why it is so important for companies to focus on sort of the role they can play in helping their customers and society move towards a net zero future, and really moving towards that more solution-focused perspective. So coming back to our speakers from BASF and Ørsted, I'd like to hear a little bit more also from you around how your organizations have moved towards a more solution-oriented approach, and also how this has benefited your organization and your stakeholders. So maybe starting with Cordula, if you could maybe talk a little bit about your shift towards low carbon products specifically.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Veronica. Yeah, and I mean, I mentioned before that we looked at greenhouse gas emissions from a corporate point of view for already many years, but we then started to realize more and more that really on a product level, this is where the questions also from marketing come. So we, about 4 years ago, started to develop a tool that now automatically calculates the product carbon footprint for all of our 45,000 products. And basically it takes the data from the SAP system, the production data, combines it with industry average on the raw materials that we are using, our exact primary data for the amount of energy, for the product carbon, for the carbon footprint of the energy sources that we are deploying. And out of that, it's calculating the cradle to gate product carbon footprint. And for us, that was a huge step, because internally at first, it really created a completely different awareness. When you know exactly the product I'm marketing, this is the product carbon footprint it has. We could compare the product carbon footprints for the more common products to data that is listed in industry databases to get a first feeling for where are we? Is our production also greenhouse gas emission wise more efficient than what competition is doing? Or are we maybe lagging behind? So really get a first analysis. And we started to then go deeper for certain selected products, and really based on publicly available information, calculate the product carbon footprints of competition as well. Of course, I mean, you can never have the same security if you are calculating something that competition is doing, because you have to rely on the data they are publishing. But we believe it's good enough to get a to get a feeling where is competition, where are we, and especially also to identify the major differences. For example, in the raw material that we are using or that competition is using, the energy sources that are deployed, or the production processes. Yeah, this is something you can also nicely derive from pattern analysis, etc. So we really went through this effort and found that for certain products, our product carbon footprint is demonstrably lower than what competition is doing. And that, of course, was the point where marketing said, hey, this is really interesting. Yeah? I want to tell this to our customers, that when they are purchasing a BASF product, they are purchasing a product that also is the best solution in terms of greenhouse gas emission reduction. And here basically is where Carbon Trust came into play. Yeah, we approached Veronica and the team, asking them to take a look at the calculations that we had been doing. Yeah, look at them compared to the methodologies they have established, and tell us whether it's possible to get the Carbon Trust label lower, demonstrably lower product carbon footprint than industry standard, or also the label carbon neutral. And this is then, I think it was quite some time we spent within the project really understanding the methodology that BASF is using for calculating the product carbon footprint, for comparing it to competition. And one thing we also discussed is what is the right analysis? Yeah, do we have to do a full LCA, or is it okay to do a cradle to gate analysis in this case? Yeah, because we are here in a business to business environment where basically our customers, they are used to just comparing on a cradle to gate basis, or this is at least where it will go to hopefully in the future. So we thought this is acceptable. Yeah, we can do a cradle to gate approach here. And then the second aspect we talked about a lot within our project with Carbon Trust was the question of feedstock. Yeah, because one of the major changes that we are able to bring along as chemical industry is the feedstock change. Yeah, to go away from fossil feedstocks to alternative feedstocks. For example, renewable feedstocks. I mean, biomass, while it's growing, takes the CO2 emissions or the CO2 out of the air and incorporates it, what is called biogenic uptake. And the question is now, how can this be incorporated also in the product carbon footprint calculation? That's something we discussed quite a lot, especially since BASF has established a model or a chain of custody approach where we are able to bring along this feedstock change quite quickly. Yeah, basically what we are doing is to feed in the alternative renewable feedstock in the very beginning of the value chain, and then allocate it in a mass balance approach to the decisive products. Sorry, I think I got a cough. Just a second. Okay. So this is the so-called mass balance chain of custody we are following here, but it enables us to use the existing plants, not to wait for investment into completely new segregated value chains, but in the existing infrastructure to just put in the new feedstock. And then within our discussions with Carbon Trust, we realized that for some of those products where we are putting in renewable feedstock, we are certainly then a PCF that is then demonstrably lower than market share. And for some other products, we are even able to reach a product carbon footprint of 0, so that the carbon neutral label could be attached even without purchasing any offsets, simply by shifting the feedstock from the standard fossil feedstock to the renewable feedstock.
Great, thank you, Cordula. And then Mia, Ørsted, as you mentioned, have undergone a sort of significant business model transformation. So maybe could you talk a little bit more about this, but then also talk about some of the next steps that you're planning to ensure that the sort of products that you're offering to your customers are really low carbon across the entire life cycle?
Yeah, maybe I can start with when we took this decision. We took it because there was an increased attention from key stakeholders and customers towards climate change. There was also very trust in the decisive decision from our stakeholder, from our top management, that a viable business model was not one that was based on fossil fuels. A viable business model was one that was giving attention to environmental impact, but also a sustainable business model was and a financial business model was one that was based on renewable energy, which also means that our core customer offering today is renewable energy, and producing renewable energy with close to zero direct emissions. We are also helping our customers decarbonize their footprint. So government customers having a national climate target, having us as a customer for producing that electricity helps them on their decarb journey. So a low carbon product in terms of renewable electricity is our core customer offering. And we are also taking next steps now, because we are seeing increased attention from our stakeholders that renewable electricity is not just enough. There is increasing attention to also deliver decarbonized green electricity. So figuring out how to tackle those emissions that are linked to our supply chain. And this is very different than the direct emissions from our own operation and energy generation, because our supply chain and the emissions in our supply chain are based and stem from hard to abate sectors like steel and concrete and fuels, especially, that we use in our installation vessels when we install the wind farm far offshore. And these are some of the next steps that we are taking. We're taking them because we have a net zero target, which is also increasingly important to our customers. But we are also taking this step because this is what the world needs to reach 1.5 and stay within 1.5 degrees. It's not just renewable energy that the world needs, which is a role that we have taken upon us to help society and across industries decarbonize, both with renewable electricity, but also especially with hydrogen being one of the new technologies that I think is really game-changing in terms of staying within 1.5. But we are also seeing this as our next decarbonization frontier and the core offering that we can deliver to our customers. In order to do that, that's not an easy task, because supply chains emissions are outside a company's control. And in Ørsted's case, these materials are not just our tier one suppliers, but further up the value chain. And we established a program 2 years ago, a program that I'm leading, engaging with our strategic suppliers on this specific topic. Strategic suppliers representing more than 60% of total procurement spend. So these are our big suppliers. These are our most important suppliers. And we engage with them on decarbonization based on our own learnings in Ørsted, the importance of setting climate targets and having a clear vision within the company so all employees knows what the end goal is here, reporting on emission, understanding hotspot emissions so you are able to direct your climate action, and also be using green electricity, because that is one of the readily available technologies and a low-hanging fruit that also comes at a price that is competitive at the moment. And I think in terms of green electricity in our or electricity in our own supply chain, it accounts for around 20%. So it's not just an easy fix, but it's also a pretty big bulk in terms of our total emissions in the value chain. And we're seeing in just 2 years a big progress with our suppliers. This is based on dialogue. This is based on collaboration, which I think is very key in terms of tackling those hard supply chain emissions. And this is via implemented and structured dialogue in procurement processes, having these dialogues with our suppliers on these different topics. And for example, we ask our strategic suppliers to set science-based targets. Before the program, zero suppliers have had set a science-based target or committed to have a science-based target, and now 40% of our strategic suppliers have set a science-based target. That also means that they're not just setting targets; they're also setting targets that are aligned with what science dictates, and that's important for us. But not just in terms of that's where you find the credible climate action, but it's also a kind of a stamp of approval or a recognition that we know our suppliers is on the same journey as us, and we need them to be on this same decarb journey in order to reach our targets, net zero in 2040 across all scopes, but also to make sure that if we want to offer a decarbonized renewable electricity to our customers, then we need our suppliers on board this journey with us.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I think both of you have really highlighted that there's really a wide variety of ways to move towards a more sort of solution-oriented perspective, whether that's sort of shifting towards low carbon products or identifying ways that sort of your solutions that you're offering can enable a transition to net zero. But you've also highlighted the importance of always thinking ahead and sort of not remaining constant and keeping on innovating across your value chain. And so my next question is for you, Jay. As part of the Net Zero Compatibility Initiative, you've looked at thousands of different innovations that are helping to avoid global carbon emissions. From this work, can you maybe identify some of the trends in the innovation space of the Net Zero Compatibility Initiative, and maybe also highlight what type of companies you see that are seizing the opportunities in this space?
Absolutely, thanks, Veronica. There are some broad trends that we see, and for us, one of the key trends that's born out of a solution approach is that the conversation has started to move away from a focus on the largest emitters in existing sectors and how we can make them emit less, which we call a static problem approach, which isn't to say that it isn't important to look at ways to reduce existing emissions from these sources. Of course, it is. But it can limit our thinking and leave many of the more disruptive or transformative solutions that we need to reach our climate objectives quickly enough. It can leave them hidden from view, and also the stakeholders of tomorrow can be left out of the conversation. So through a solution perspective, we see the door is being opened to many more solutions that may not otherwise be visible when focusing on existing systems, or when we limit our focus to self-identified climate solutions. Cordula talked about the choice of whether to do a full LCA. In many cases, when new disruptive solutions are considered, they could be dismissed by some types of assessments as having little potential because they don't fit into existing systems, or they're based on new or future systems where we simply don't have enough data to make accurate assessments. So acquiring new data and making data more open is an important trend, where a lot of great work is being done, but the need for data is also big, and the data that's needed isn't well understood in terms of how we deliver on human needs. What we see is the avoided emissions framework and the 4-step approach to climate impact assessments allows for solution providers to be identified and supported. And by focusing on solutions, we also are expanding this innovation space to include how solutions deliver on human needs, to be able to identify and support and accelerate those solutions that are most compatible with human needs for 11 billion flourishing lives. And I think a really important trend here, and a really good an important example of work that's identifying the demand for solutions that deliver on human needs, is the United Nations Climate Change Global Innovation Hub, which we co-developed and launched with the UNFCCC at COP26 in Glasgow. And this year's Global Innovation Hub pavilion at COP27 included a number of companies that have now joined the Global Innovation Hub as partners and supporters, which is really important to help develop and test tools for identifying solutions delivering on human needs, and the demand for those solutions, and establishing that demand, for example, in cities and regions. An important aspect of that, of the Global Innovation Hub, is the inclusion of enablers. And many assessment frameworks in use today, they tend to focus on material and technology substitutions in the supply chain, whereas enablers such as PR agencies, law firms, conference organizers, and so on are not given credit for their leadership and contributions that enable and support solutions that deliver on human needs. Veronica, you mentioned collaboration from all sectors. Linked to this, one benefit that we've proposed by including enablers is that it can help to identify potential clusters of stakeholders and how those clusters of stakeholders can deliver on human needs together. And some companies we've talked to see this cluster effect actually as one of the most important aspects to understand when considering their contribution to sustainability, rather than an assessment of their material impact. So I think that's a space to watch. Encouragingly, we also see more and more organizations recognizing the need for different kinds of assessments that focus on solutions and human needs. And some of the leading organizations in this space are ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability, and their work on cities being seen as solution providers and how a focus on human needs can turn challenges into opportunities. There's also the OECD with their full iceberg approach that is designed to move from addressing the means, as they phrase it, such as transportation, and instead addressing the ends, which is essentially human welfare. This year, Japan will also push for the use of avoided emissions as a metric and for companies as solution providers at the G7 in April, which is a really fantastic move. And this quarter also, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development will publish guidance on avoided emissions for companies as well. So I would say that there is a clear trend and lots of exciting developments and more companies coming into this space in line with this solution and human needs approach that's really starting to emerge now.
Great, thank you, Jay. So we've talked a little bit about the need and benefits of taking a more solution-focused perspective, and we've also heard from sort of both companies we have represented here today of how they're making this shift, and also from Jay in terms of what's happening on a wider scale and some of the trends that we're seeing there. But I think the fact is that still a lot of probably external and internal discussions in companies is much more around risk mitigation and sort of reducing your own emissions. So with that, I want to talk a little bit also now around how you've made that shift in your own organizations, and maybe highlighting some of the challenges that you've come across when sort of doing this. So maybe if I ask Mia first. Again, as I mentioned, Ørsted have obviously made quite a big decision to sort of shift their business model to focusing on renewables and providing the low carbon electricity needed for a net zero transition. But with this also comes a lot of change that is required internally to make this happen. Could you maybe talk a little bit about what some of the internal challenges are that you've been facing around implementing this green transformation across the company? I think you're still on mute, Mia.
Sorry. When we started this discussion in our company in the early 2010s, there was a lot of resistance also in the company. First and foremost, the business case didn't add up. It was a very risky investment decision to transform the company, and you really had to trust to gain those long-term benefits. We were also one of the best ones in the world to run power plants, and we had our core competences built on oil and gas. So this was not an easy thing. What made it possible was the steer of the senior management and the steer of the CEO having a clear vision throughout the company. So employees knew what this end goal was. We see the same when it comes to our decarbonization of supply chain journey, having this science-based net zero target in 2040 being approved and as part of core business strategy in the company helps with this transformation. We are also working on different initiatives at the moment. Last year was the first time where we actually had the executive teams KPIs linked up to sustainability efforts with the same way as financial KPIs also. So having it rooted in both core business strategy, but also in decision makers and basically the bonus that the executive team gets on their performance and them being evaluated on sustainability also. But at the moment, for example, when so green transformation and renewable energy, it's very much part of the culture now in Ørsted. It's also why a lot of new employees look to Ørsted. So this we kind of made it, and we are now one of the big ones in the industry. And now having to turn to employees and senior management with this next layer of decarbonization adds another complexity and another challenge. And I think there's also a question from the audience in terms of how do we build these turbines today, because a lot of the solutions are not available. So when you look at lower carbon solutions in our value chain, it comes with a green premium. And how the wind industry today is organized is that we get a kind of a space to build on, but in order to get the permission to build, the auction with the government is solely on price, and the price intensity and the competition in this market is heavy. So when I come with the low carbon solutions or greener materials or something like that comes with a really steep green premium, it's of course it's not a good business case. So what we are doing is both working with our customers in terms of trying to integrate non-price parameters into these different auctions. So competition is not solely on price, but could be on something else. And of course, in terms of internal business cases, increasingly making sure that they understand the different needs and the appetites and try to build this next decarbonization frontier as a competitive advantage also, to not only deliver renewable energy to our customers, but also decarbonized energy. And I think that is where the industry is going, and the one that are first movers on this will be the one that wins in the end. Science-based targets, we were the only company in the industry last year with a science-based target, and now it's basically becoming the golden standard, also taking net zero targets from 2050 to 2040, moving it up 10 years ahead of what science dictates. So we are increasingly trying to also link our sustainability efforts to our competition and our commercial business and build it into our core offerings. But it's not an easy task, and it's not an easy task when the green solutions are also more expensive. And I think one of the ways of going about that is working with suppliers, working with partners, and also across industries. So many of the materials that our supply chain emissions stem from are not unique to Ørsted's supply chain, which also means that the influence that Ørsted has on, for example, the steel industry, even though we are a renewable energy leader, is very limited. So working with other companies and setting ambitious commitments to really mature those technology, to make them reach cost competitive prices, so we can start taking those decisions. And then also being able to compete on something else than price. And that's where carbon is very interesting, because it's actually a metric that you are able to compare, and something that is that customers and stakeholders really value, because it's tangible. And we are from this month, we will actually be externally reporting on our Scope 3 emission using life cycle assessment. So before we based these on studies or theoretical assumption, which is a common standard in our industry and across industries. But to increase this transparency and awareness around the supply chain emissions, we will start reporting on project-specific supply chain emissions. So it's clear to our stakeholders and to our customers what is the specific carbon footprint of this asset project. We're also working with peers on establishing a common standard for this. So that enables comparability across assets and across developers. One thing that Cordula is also referring to as being kind of a game changer to push our own industry forward, but also across industries. Having this metric that is very visible to a customer and increases the transparency, and hopefully also having customers choosing the one with the lower carbon footprint than the other one that has a higher one.
Great, thank you, Mia. And I think you touched on something I think that's just really crucial, and that's sort of the importance of your customers really understanding the benefit of the low carbon solutions and products that you're providing to them. And I think this is also important for you, Cordula, at BASF. So could you maybe talk a little bit about that, and also about the importance of communication to your stakeholders? So how you've done this, what some of the learnings are, and maybe also how you think that this can eventually bring about sort of long-term change to the overall market as well.
Yeah, definitely I can do so. But let me first say that it's nice to hear how many things are very similar in our industry as they are in your industry, Mia. Yeah, I mean, this gives me confidence that we are really, as a society, moving in the right direction. And actually, I'd also say this is really what has been important also for our path as BASF, to see more and more that society in general, policy, but also individual end consumers, they really take this greenhouse gas emission reduction challenge task, they take that for honest. Yeah, and I mean, just to give you an example, if you purchase a bottle of shampoo, about 90% of the greenhouse gas emissions that are associated with this bottle come from the chemical industry, from the chemical ingredients that are in that shampoo. So if more and more end consumers are really asking for reduced product carbon footprint shampoos or even carbon neutral shampoos, that means, of course, along the value chain, this demand for lower PCF products will be transported until it ends in the chemical industry. And chemical industry is at the beginning of so many different value chains. But since we are at the beginning, it's sometimes it takes time until the demand from society, from the end consumer, really ends up in our place. And this is where I can only echo what Mia and also Jay said. It's so important that we form the right partnerships. Basically, what we have to do is really, along the value chain, be aligned. As I said before, we are the ones who, for example, can bring different feedstocks into the value chains. We can also completely change production processes, but none of this comes for free. I mean, all those easy, win-win options where it's increase efficiency, reduce greenhouse gas emission, reduce costs. Of course, this is what has been done in the past. So now we are really at implementing those measures that do cost additional money. And since they are really large changes for our industry, it's a large price premium that we are asking for. I think it's quite similar to what Mia has said. So now it's about passing on that price premium along the value chain. Because, I mean, many studies and analysis have shown when you come down to the end consumer products, I mean, there it's often negligible. It's like 3% or 4% additional costs. But on our step in the value chain, it's like maybe 50% or even more additional costs. It's just watered down along the value chain. But the change will only come if we really all agree along that value chain that we'll pass on those additional costs, that we want that change, that we want these investments to happen. So this is why it's so important to really, partner, and then also to be able to communicate. Veronica, you were asking about communication. It's really important that we can communicate also quantitative figures, to really talk to our customers and make that benefit clear, or the other way around, ask our suppliers. BASF has also established a supply chain carbon management program where we are asking all our suppliers to give us the product carbon footprint. But here it's so important that we all really know how to calculate a product carbon footprint with the specific challenges of our industry. And this is where I think there was a huge step taken in autumn last year when about 37 companies in the chemical industry, they came together in the Together for Sustainability initiative and formulated a guideline for how to calculate the product carbon footprint of chemicals. All those questions where you could do it this way or that way, there was a clear alignment how the chemical industry will do it. So that means in the future, when a customer is getting different offers from different suppliers, yeah, they can really compare, not only on the price, also on the product carbon footprint, of course, also on other things like whatever, supply chain security, quality, etc. But PCF is a new criterion that purchasing colleagues can use in making their purchase decisions. And I think this is needed. Yeah, only if we have those conscious inclusion of the product carbon footprint in purchasing decisions, and that means also then communication of the PCFs from companies in all sectors, this will then really trigger this change along the value chain. So I think it's really about working jointly along the value chains to reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Cordula. Again, sort of picking up that theme of collaboration. So before we move to some audience questions, maybe one final question to you, Jay. What do you see as some of the next steps for the Global Innovation Hub that you have mentioned? And also having worked in this space for some time, but also again knowing that a lot of companies are only starting to think about taking a more solution-focused approach to their climate change strategies. What would you say is sort of the one thing that companies should be doing right now to move from just having a problem-oriented approach to innovation to a really transformative, need-focused and solution-oriented approach?
Thanks, Veronica. Yeah, I mean, one key support for this is that in the third phase of the Net Zero Compatibility Initiative, we're focusing on delivery of a toolbox for implementation. We launched an initial set of tools at the Global Innovation Hub at COP27, which, by the way, are free to use on our website, including, for example, a tool to compare current assessment initiatives and how they handle 1.5 degree sustainable innovation and human needs. Some initiatives include or mention these perspectives and others don't, but it's these perspectives of an expanded climate innovation agenda that we aim to bring to the fore this year in 2023 by providing guidance and tools for companies and different stakeholders. We've worked with a lot of stakeholders in countries where a solution-oriented approach is being embraced, not least in the Global South. This is especially relevant not only because the Global South will represent the majority of future global emissions, but also because solutions from the Global South, by their nature, tend to be more compatible with the human needs of 11 billion flourishing lives. And it's the Global South where avoided emissions really take on their full meaning. As an example, India will host the G20 this year and has shown leadership through Mission Innovation's International Incubator, CEIIC or Social Alpha, that also launched a global challenge at COP27 to incubators and accelerators to present their strategies at COP28 that aim to deliver a total potential impact of 1 gigaton of avoided emissions per year. And we really hope that other countries will take up that challenge along with the companies that are providing the solutions to present those solutions for global sustainability. Together with ICLEI and the Global Covenant of Mayors and the Global Innovation Hub, we'll also be continuing work with cities and regions to be solution providers through the companies and startups that they support. Me talked about changing business models, and for companies, a solutions approach can be used as a strategic tool for business model innovation and to guide their support and investment for the next generation of solutions. Cordula also mentioned marketing, and it's this focus on human needs that helps companies to move away from just a risk management approach that's of course also good and important to a sales-driven perspective where the focus is on the impact in society through the lens of humans, not just a process to essentially make fossil-free versions of what we already have. And regardless of how well companies know their value chain emissions and their impact on human needs, all companies should do a human need contribution assessment as part of their strategic planning. So it's the tools to support this that that we're focusing on in this third phase of the Net Zero Compatibility Initiative. And I just wondered if I can take one of the questions there, which is on what speakers see as potential game-changing innovations that will accelerate emissions reductions to the pace and scale that's needed. In terms of the pace and scale, to accelerate emissions reductions, we know that the approaches that we've had historically haven't led to the changes we need. So it was a significant move by the UNFCCC to develop the Global Innovation Hub that addresses this challenge that we have been asking the wrong questions, or we have been defining the problem in ways that haven't led to the emissions reductions that we need. When we take a solutions perspective and a human needs driven approach, we have much greater opportunity to identify and support new disruptive and transformative solutions that have the potential to deliver on 1.5 degree sustainable solutions. And I think a lot of the game-changing innovations that we need are not yet known about for this very reason, that we haven't been focusing on solutions. And through our work, we've seen thousands of solutions, but it's really vital that we start to ask the right questions so that we can identify and support these solutions. And I'll end it there and just say thanks for that question, and we really look forward to anyone who'd like to pursue this further and work with us.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jay. So before we end the panel, I now want to move on maybe just to a couple of brief questions from the audience that have been coming in. So maybe a first question again for Jay here. What do you see as potential game-changing innovations that will accelerate emissions reductions to both the pace and scale that is needed?
So that's sorry, Veronica, that was the one I was just referring to. Essentially, it's I think I would summarize it like this, that in the majority of cases, we don't know what those innovations are simply because we haven't been asking the right questions. And when we start to ask the right questions, we get entirely different answers compared to the questions that we were asking previously. And what that highlights is that there are a lot of solutions out there that are simply hidden from view right now. So it's extremely important and good news that we are starting to ask those questions, but more of us need to do that, and that will help us to identify the solutions that we need that are sufficiently that do meet the pace and scale that we need.
Great, fantastic. And maybe one final question for both Cordula and Mia, if you can answer very briefly around engagement with strategic suppliers. So the question here is, does that mean that there are tender advantages for suppliers who are performing better on climate actions? And really, how do you motivate suppliers to join you on the net zero journey? So maybe Mia first and then Cordula briefly.
Yeah, sure. I think two things that are important to understand, and I'll do it briefly before answering the question, is that there are few suppliers in the renewable energy industry. So it's not like deselecting one supplier, we can just choose another one necessarily. And the topic is even more complex when you would like to use local suppliers, for example. The other is that our supply chain was not at the same maturity level when it comes to climate strategy, climate target setting, or sustainability journeys in general as we were. So first step was to build up capabilities with our suppliers to start taking this journey, setting targets, which means that they didn't get an advantage in tenders or anything, but it was collaboration and it was dialogue and it was building up capabilities also internally in Ørsted, in our QHSE department, in our procurement department. So it's structurally systematic part of our way of working with our suppliers. With that being said, our suppliers know that we are aiming to reach our net zero target in 2040, and we won't reach that target without our suppliers. And we see a big appetite from our suppliers on getting on this journey together with us, because they also, of course, see that a viable business model is one that is based on way lower emissions than the industry is today.
Yeah, and maybe to add on that, from the perspective of BASF, I think there are two topics that are important. One is really to also, together with the supplier, work on the competencies. Yeah, when we set up our supply chain carbon management program, we really also had partnerships with different organizations who could train suppliers in how do you actually calculate a product carbon footprint. Yeah, because sometimes this is not known. So really to support ability, competence build up at suppliers is something you can do. And the second thing, of course, is then also really be in this honest dialogue, explain to suppliers why you are doing that, and maybe also talk about, what are our experience now as BASF with handing out product carbon footprints to our customers. And for example, the very positive feedback that we were getting when we launched our low product carbon footprint portfolio in the chemical intermediates arena, we really had our customers coming back to us and saying, hey, it's great that someone is starting us, that we now have a variety to choose from, that we can see it's possible to produce certain products with a considerably lower product carbon footprint, and this really created interest and opened some ways of discussions we didn't have before, and by sharing such experiences again with our suppliers, this then also motivates them to really get working on this topic.
Great, thank you. Well, I think that's unfortunately all we have time for today. So thank you for all the audience questions that have been sent in. I also want to say a big thank you to all of the panelists today for a very interesting and I think thought-provoking discussion. So this concludes the panel for today.
Welcome back. Next, I'd like to introduce a man who doesn't really need any introduction, but this is Hugh Jones, who's the Managing Director for the Carbon Trust. He's responsible for our advisory business, providing strategic climate change consulting to many businesses and organisations. Hugh, welcome. Good to see you. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Ralph, and good morning, everybody. And it's really great to see you all on here. And I'm really just here to sum up the session as we move to a close. But I thought it was a fantastic set of sessions, and we really did have a great range of speakers to whom I think we should all be very grateful. The leading takeaway that I took from this was that Route to Net Zero is partly about the here and now, but it's also partly and largely about the future. And it was really encouraging to see that 3/4 of you, judging by the poll, are already on that route to net zero. But it was also very much the case that it's going to get tougher as we go on this journey together. And we saw from all of the speakers actually that it's going to require not just adherence to the route that many of you are on, but also really transformative thinking, collaboration, innovation to lead us to the right solutions. And I think where Carbon Trust has been and continues to be, and will be able to help you with, is that we're able to perhaps marry that practical approach, which we saw from those great corporate speakers today, with the strategic thinking that is required for tomorrow. And I think that's really, really important. Just reviewing what we saw today, Ilias from DG Connect, he really set the tone, I think, at the beginning with that broader sweep. And he really talked about the need for system change above anything else, obviously from his point of view with a digitalization context. But of course, digital is going to be at the heart of so much transformation. It's a totally sort of valid context to bring. And one of the things that Ilias said that really, I think, struck myself and many of us was, there is this need to move right across the board to service-led rather than quantity-based models, business models. He gave a great example in agriculture of how it's going to be far better to be judged on servicing and maintaining the health of a hectare rather than on how much fertilizer and pesticide product you can sell into that hectare. And I think that's a unifying thought, because whatever business you're in, even whatever the size of your company, you are going to be living in a world where that sort of business model is going to be necessary. So it's something, whatever your emissions, whatever your own organizations reach net zero, that is going to be a theme which will affect us all. Ilias also talked specifically about the European Green Digital Coalition that we're proud to be working with, and really interestingly, the Digital Product Passport, which is something I think you can all look into, and is an approach for more, if you like, supply chain, value chain information. And that is a theme, probably the main theme that actually came out in the latter two sessions. We had some great input from 4 corporates. So Simon at Carlsberg, we had Geraldine at Grundfos, Mia at Ørsted, and Cordula at BASF, and they all, although the two sessions were themed slightly differently, they all actually showed that their organizations are looking at this both from the here and now, but also taking an increasingly strategic view. We heard about the reason for doing net zero, for getting on the path, and ultimately being a viable business in a climate constrained world, being resilient and realizing the opportunities and managing the risks of green transition. All of those elements came out. We had some really practical advice on how to do it, top tips, etc. We heard some quite technical input on the need for primary data. We heard some great stuff from BASF on the biogenic uptake and the really detailed way that they'd gone about and continue to go about footprinting and comparing to the competition. We heard about the detail on packaging and detail on or moving into regenerative agriculture and all the measurement that will require from Carlsberg. And we heard some really similarly in-depth views from Geraldine at Grundfos about how they've really given their carbon accounting the same sort of level of scrutiny as organizations would traditionally give financial accounting. So it's really, really important. They all talked about the value chain, and it was great to hear from Mia at Ørsted in some depth about how they are changing the conversation with their customers as well as the conversation with their suppliers in order to really communicate the benefits and indeed the costs of sustainability and sort of make it happen along the value chain. And we heard a similar story from all of them. And then of course we heard from Jay representing RISE, but also Mission Innovation. And I think some really interesting perspectives there on the need to sort of move away from just looking at static systems in a static way and looking at sort of human needs driven approaches, and really looking at disruptive technologies and disruptive approaches, which one of the areas that we've been involved with Jay has been around the measurement of avoided emissions. That is only one part of it, but it's broadening the innovation approach to understanding what is going to work and what is going to fit together in the transformed economy of the future. So all in all, I would just like to say on behalf of the Carbon Trust, a big thank you to all of those speakers. Thank you, of course, to Pauline and to Veronica for leading the sessions, and to all of the home team for your great support in this event, and of course to all of the audience for being here. You should now see, or very shortly see, a further and final poll. This one is about next steps. And if you could answer that one, we can then hand over to Ralph, who is going to close the session, and hopefully we'll have the results of the poll. So from me, on behalf of the Carbon Trust, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Hugh. It's good to see you, and thank you for the great summary of today's events. I know there have been hundreds of people watching. Just whilst we look at these poll results, I thought I'd keep you on the screen just so you can see what they are. So if you bring up the poll results, please. So the question was, after today's event, what are the next steps you are planning to move your business further towards net zero? And what's interesting there is the highest result is for create a detailed transition plan, which I think was the third in the list, wasn't it, in terms of your journey? Is that what you were expecting?
Well, yeah, I think it's a reasonably evenly split series of or set of answers there, Ralph, and I think that partly reflects where organisations perceive themselves, in terms of what they've actually done so far on net zero. I think what's also interesting about a plan, everyone needs a plan, but actually we're thinking here in at least two horizons. We're thinking the next few years, and what are those tangible and implementable measures organizations can take now with their suppliers, even with their customers, and certainly internally. But then we're thinking about the so-called post-transition, and there we're into the realms of the unknown. And as a number of the speakers said earlier, it's not wrong to not know stuff. There is stuff we all don't know, and we will all make some mistakes. But it's really important now to be setting the tone for systems thinking about the future and for innovation. So in that answer about the transition plan, I think it contains not just what we do today, but it contains how do we set ourselves up for the next 5, 10, 15 years.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how that progresses, and also the innovation that happens. Well, Hugh, Thank you so much. Thank you to everybody who's taken part in today's sessions. All that remains for me is to close the event. I just remind you that if you want to find out more about the Carbon Trust, you can head to our website, which is carbontrust.com. You'll also find a newsletter on there under News and Insights. That's a great way of staying in touch with all of the initiatives. And you could see today that there are a huge amount of partner organizations that we work with, other certification bodies and systems and processes that we're helping people put into place. So please check out the website, make sure that you're subscribed to the newsletter. And if you want to attend any of the other events that are in this series, you'll find them on the website as well. This is actually the first one, at least outside of China, but there are more this week and also in a couple of weeks' time. So that's all from me. We'll see you again soon. Thank you very much.